A lot of companies claim that they have the headphone solution for professionals. Audeze, Sennheiser, Audio-Technica, Sony, and even some super cheap hi-fi brands have made such promises. Ultrasone is one company that has a huge list of headphones, and most of them seemed targeted towards studio use. A few years ago, they teamed up with Atom Audio, a brand traditionally known for its speakers. This collaboration led to the Atom Audio SP-5, a $500 headphone that gained some praise when it was announced. Today, we're going to delve into this product and find out how it performs. The SP-5 is a studio headphone first and foremost. That's what the SP in the title means, Studio Professional. Atom Audio says that the SP-5 is a premium quality headphone designed for professional use with a balanced and dynamic response for monitor and mixing. They promise that this headphone will reproduce, quote, pristine resolution throughout the entire bandwidth. Like Ultrasone's other headphones, the SP-5 incorporates their S-Logic technology. You should check out Ultrasone's explanation of this feature. It's lots of vague word salad. The bottom line is that Ultrasone places the transducers at the bottom of the ear cups instead of near the top or the center. They claim that this results in less fatigue during long listening sessions. Ultrasone further promises that S-Logic will render better perception of details. Ultrasone says that their S-Logic technology is geared to provide, quote, neutral sound signature. Atom Audio says that the SP-5 is designed to sound like their speakers. Sadly, we do not get a frequency response graph or any specific detail about how this headphone should sound. That, at least, is typical of audio companies. If you have seen other Ultrasone headphones, then the SP-5 will look no different. In fact, this headphone shares the general design of the Signature and Studio series. The SP-5 is made almost entirely of plastic. The ear cups have a rubber coating. The ear cups turn 180 degrees to lay flat, and they also fold. The ear pads are fake leather, made of general foam padding, and are not proprietary. You can indeed swap these with any third-party ear pads that will fit. The headband padding is made of thick, stiff foam and covered with pleather. The yokes and headband structure are plastic. The SP-5 comes with a hardshell case and 2 cables. The SP-5 uses a locking cable design. As for comfort, this is going to be a bit challenging for some. The SP-5 has a tight clamp. The ear pads mitigate discomfort, but this is not the relaxed fit you might have hoped for. The ear pads cause hot spots on the ears fairly quickly, and for me, that meant my ears got warm after only a few minutes. The headband padding is so stiff that it caused a bit of pressure on the top of the head. In my opinion, the One More triple driver is hands down the most uncomfortable headphone to wear, followed by anything that Beats makes. The SP-5 is not at that level of discomfort, but it was not a headphone I could wear non-stop. Indeed, I could not wear the SP-5 for more than 2 hours before needing a break. In summary, the SP-5 has a very utilitarian design. While the use of plastic and pleather makes sense in a professional environment, it's still disappointing to see such casual use of plastic in a $500 headphone. The accessories are agreeable, but the lack of spare ear pads, and not particularly good ear pads at that, is astounding. It is nonsensical penny pinching either by Ultrasone or Atom Audio or both. Finally, comfort is going to be problematic for some. I tested the SP-5 using the RME 80i2 DAC, Brooklyn DAC Plus, Low2 PAW 6000, and EcoZerta ITM03. I used the stock accessories and listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. The SP-5 is easy to drive. No need to use a powerful amp. My tests show that the SP-5 has a bass roll-off. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, there's a rumble from the beginning which builds into a crescendo. The SP-5 presented this detail. The rumble was a bit quieter than what I heard on the neutral Olo S4X. Transients was faster on the SP-5, though not to the same level as with planar headphones. When the crescendo hit, the SP-5 kept the organ separate from the other instruments. The rolling thunder effect was audible, but did not overwhelm the other elements. When the vocals chimed in, they rose from the background until they were one step ahead of the instruments. In Conquered by Overwork, there's a rolling marble sound at the beginning. This pans from right to left to center. The SP-5 did present this sound and the panning. There are multiple drums in this track, and the SP-5 rendered them all similarly. In other words, the various drums all had hard impact, and each drum strike was distinct from subsequent ones. Drum strikes had sharp thwacking sounds. In contrast, the S4X had more melding among drum strikes and longer reverberation. I listened to several hip-hop songs, including Pure Water, Yupatek, Reel It In, and Uproar. On each occasion, the SP-5 presented the sub-bass and de-emphasized it. The subwoofer always sounded like it was at the middle of a large room. The vocals were about 2 steps ahead of the instruments and retained their sparkle. The drums were louder than the sub-bass. In contrast, the S4X rendered louder sub-bass and slightly more obvious drum hits. I listened to my Sicario playlist. I used these tracks to determine if there's any audible bass distortion. Traversing from low to high volumes, I could not hear any distortion. Overall, the SP-5 has a bass roll-off. Sub-bass is not neutral, while mid-bass is closer to that mark. There's above-average clarity in this region. My tests indicate that the SP-5 has forward mids with sibilant vocals. In Orla Gartland's Why Am I Like This, there is natural vocal grain and sibilance mixed into the track. The SP-5 presented and emphasized both. This was patently obvious when I compared the SP-5 against the more neutral Aventone planar. The SP-5's sibilance emphasis was greater than what I heard on the audeze S4X. However, the SP-5 had less sibilance than the HD560S. Oriolus' voice was 2 steps ahead of the instruments. None of the instruments were veiled. There was audible separation among them. On the S4X, such separation was not quite as obvious. In Want You Back by Haim, the SP-5 again showed that it emphasizes vocal sibilance. This was a few decibels greater than what I heard on the audeze S4X. At 8 seconds into the track, the primary singer says the word "we" and drags it out, making it sound gravelly. The SP-5 rendered this detail. There are 2 backup vocalists, one in either channel. The SP-5 initially presented all 3 vocalists clearly with their individual tonalities. However, when the instruments played at maximum, the backup vocalists melded into one voice. With concentration, I could just barely hear the 3 separate voices. The drums, bass, guitar, and piano all remained clear and distinct. The vocals remained 2 steps ahead of the other elements. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the SP-5 presented the ukulele, drums, and bass. All instruments were separate. The primary male vocalist was 2 steps ahead of the instruments. His vocal sibilance was slightly emphasized. In contrast, the S4X did not emphasize that detail. There's a backup vocalist whose voice is layered beneath the primaries. Most headphones cannot reveal this subtle detail. The SP-5 could not either. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are sharp intakes of breaths. The SP-5 presented this detail. Overall, the SP-5 has forward mids. Both male and female vocalists will receive a sibilance emphasis. Mid-centric instruments are easy to hear in a mix. My test suggests that the SP-5 has a mid-treble emphasis. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the SP-5 presented the brass and horns clearly. Their nasally signatures were easily audible. However, the higher-pitched notes seemed a bit emphasized, marginally louder than what I heard on the more neutral Aventone planar. This was, however, similar to what I heard on the S4X. On the SP-5, the timpani was audible, but it did not drown out the other instruments. The SP-5 has some width, depth, and verticality. In other words, some instruments seemed further out into the wings, some sounded like they were deeper into the room, and a few sounds came from above or below. In Flight from the City, the SP-5 made the piano sound like it was 7 feet away. Its bassy notes were underemphasized, but each was clear and separate from the next. The cello was as loud as the piano and sounded, for a lack of better terminology, smooth. Both instruments remained distinct and clear throughout the song. I could hear the pops and sizzles and electric buzzing effects, the creaking of wood on the pianist's bench, and the shifting of the cello's weight. In Take 5 by the De Brubeck Quartet, the SP-5 rendered the piano in the right, drums in the left, saxophone center, and bass 1 step behind. All instruments were clear, separate, and their tonalities were not veiled or lost anywhere throughout the song. The cymbals were as loud as the saxophone. The saxophone's higher-pitched notes were louder, more energetic than what I heard on the Aventone planar and the audeze S4X. The cymbals are struck at different positions, which should result in varying tonalities. The SP-5 presented this subtle detail. Overall, it appears that the SP-5 has a treble boost, probably starting around the mid-treble. Cymbals get a considerable emphasis in a mix, though they are not necessarily harsh. Atom Audio does not say much with respect to the performance of the SP-5. They do not make any particular claims regarding detail retrieval. Ultrasone, however, does. According to them, the S-Logic technology should reveal details. Well, I have some experience with Ultrasone Studio headphones, and the SP-5 seems to follow their trend. The SP-5 does render details and clarity, but it is not what you might expect. You see, the SP-5 renders some details while leaving others behind. Layered details are not this headphone's strength, but every once in a while you might hear subtle, nuanced details that you had not heard on other gear. Obvious details are just that, obvious. But in some instances, those details might be sharper on the SP-5 than on competitors. Creaking of wood, shifting of a cello's weight, sharp intakes of breaths, multiple vocalists, twangs of guitar strings, nasally signatures of brass and horns, these types of details are abundantly clear on this headphone. It is an odd mixture of clarity, revelation of some subtle details, and emphasis of those that are obvious to begin with. On occasion, I was left thinking that the SP-5 should reveal greater details in a particular mix, but the headphone did not perform in that manner. Other times, I was a bit surprised to hear the details that I did. Odd, just like I said. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, wind, rustling of grass, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of steps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Sennheiser HD800S presents 22 footsteps. The Focal Clear presents 18. The Austrian Audio HiX65 presents 16 to 17. The HiX55 presents 16. The HiX15 and X25BT each present 13 to 14 footsteps. The hifi Mansundara, Avatone Planar, Sifka Phoenix, and Beyerdynamic DT1990 present 10 to 11. The Monolith M1070, M1570, Sifka Robin, and Ultrasone Pro 1480i all provide 8 to 9. The audeze LCD2 Closed and LCD2 Classic each provide 7 to 8. The older M1060C provides 7. The audeze LCD1 and HD6XX present 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann NDH20 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. And the SP-5 rendered 12 footsteps. On my scale of detail retrieval, the HD6XX and LCD1 are the average performers. Any headphone that provides more or less detail is judged accordingly. So, the NDH20 would be considered as below average and the hifi Mansundara as above average. Here, based on this scale, I think the SP-5 has above average detail retrieval, overtaking the likes of the NDH20, LCD2, and the DT1990. Ultrasone says that the S-Logic enhances Soundstage. I don't know if you can attribute this to S-Logic alone or whether the tuning is the greater contributor. We have found closed-back headphones that have wide Soundstage, and on those occasions, S-Logic was not used. So keep all this stuff about S-Logic at a distance. But the SP-5, despite its closed-back design, is a reasonably wide-sounding headphone for what it is. If you come from Beats or Bose headphones, then yes, you will say that the SP-5 is a very wide-sounding headphone. But compared to other audiophile headphones, the experience is going to be put into a different context. I have a Soundstage scale. Once again, I use the HD6XX and LCD1 as my average performers. Headphones that have more or less Soundstage than these two are judged accordingly. The audeze Mobius and all Beats headphones have claustrophobic Soundstage. The NDH20 and ATH M60X have below average soundstage. The HD6XX and LCD1 have average soundstage. The Sifka Phoenix, Emotiva GR1, and Ultrasone Pro 1480i have average to maybe above average soundstage depending on the particular recording. The hifi Mansundara, Avatone Planar, Austrian Audio HiX55 and X65, and the LCD2 Classic have above average soundstage. The hifi Mandiva has wide soundstage. The HD800S has super wide soundstage. In my opinion, the SP-5 has soundstage wider than the HD6XX and LCD1, but not quite as wide as the Sundara or Avantone Planar. So I would say that the SP-5 has slightly above average soundstage. I have never heard Atom Audio speakers, and I do not know what their sound signature is supposed to be. If you have, then you would be the best judges of whether Atom Audio's claim is true regarding the SP-5. Remember, they say that the SP-5 follows the tuning of their speakers, and frankly, I cannot delve into that debate. Atom Audio does briefly mention that the SP-5 has a balanced sound. In my mind, balanced means that some portions of the frequency is purposefully deviated away from neutral, and in my book, neutral is how the Avantone Planar, Allo Audio S4X, the Sennheiser HD6XX, and Moondrop Quarks sound. So at least as far as I am concerned, there is a standard by which to compare. Here, the SP-5 is probably a balanced, tuned headphone. The bass is rolled off, sub-bass is underemphasized, mid-bass is close to neutral, separation between them is clear. Transients is faster than typical dynamic drivers, but slower than planars. The mids are forward. Vocalists will receive a sibilance emphasis. Vocals stand 2 steps ahead of instruments. Mid-centric clarity is present, and separation among elements is usually obvious. The treble seems to have a boost starting in the mid-treble region. I do not believe this is necessarily harsh or piercing, but that will depend a lot on your music and personal preferences. The SP-5 has above-average detail and above-average soundstage. In summary, yeah, I think you could say that the SP-5 has a balanced tuning, but I'd also add that the SP-5 has a lean bass and a bit of analytical nature to it. You could certainly use these headphones for casual listening, as much as you could for professional work. That is up to you. But I have no doubt that the SP-5 is not for everyone. It is important that we conduct comparisons of products. That's the only way to know if you're about to buy a lemon or lemonade. Here, we are going to compare the SP-5 against the Neumann NDH20, Austrian Audio Hi-X55, and the Beyerdynamic DT700 Pro X. For these tests, I used the stock accessories. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. I plugged each headphone into a passive AB switch that was connected to my RME 80i2 DAC. And of course, I tried to volume match. The NDH20 and SP-5 has similar bass response. Both have a sub-bass roll-off, and it sounds nearly identical in amount. Mid-bass impact is also somewhat similar. It sounded like the NDH20 had slightly greater emphasis in this regard, but not by much. Clarity and separation between sub-bass and mid-bass was more obvious on the SP-5. Transient was also a little bit faster on the SP-5. The mids are different. The SP-5 has greater separation of mid-centric elements. However, it also emphasizes both vocal sibilance and grain. The NDH20 de-emphasizes a little of the vocal sibilance, but does have a marginal emphasis of grain. The NDH20 places vocals closer to the ears. Vocals stand further ahead of instruments on the SP-5. The treble is similar. The NDH20 has a slight emphasis starting in the mid-treble. The SP-5 also has a treble emphasis in this area. Overall, it sounded as if the SP-5 has a bit more treble push in comparison. Separation, clarity, and placement of treble instruments is more obvious on the SP-5. The SP-5 has greater detail and clarity and much greater soundstage than the NDH20. The Hi-X55 has a different bass response. The X55 has a bass roll-off in general. Both sub-bass and mid-bass are more reduced than on the SP-5. Separation and clarity in this region is a bit more obvious on the X55. Transients is also faster on the X55. The mids are a bit different. Both the X55 and SP-5 push vocals forward ahead of instruments. Mid-centric clarity and separation is more obvious on the X55. Both headphones emphasize sibilance, but the SP-5 has a bit more energy in this detail. The SP-5 also accentuates vocal grain, but the X55 does not. The treble is different. While the SP-5 has a treble emphasis starting in the mid-treble, the X55 has a more neutral rendition in comparison. There was less energy to higher-pitched treble notes on the X55 than the SP-5. Separation and clarity was similar between the two headphones, but the X55 was slightly better at it. The X55 has a bit more detail, clarity, and placement than the SP-5. However, both headphones seem to exhibit similar soundstage. The DT700 has similar bass response to the SP-5. Both headphones have a sub-bass roll-off, and both have nearly identical mid-bass energy. Separation and clarity in this region, however, is more obvious on the SP-5. Transience is faster on the SP-5. The mids are somewhat similar. Both the SP-5 and the DT700 have forward mids. Both place vocals 2 steps ahead of instruments. The DT700 has a marginal emphasis of vocal sibilance compared to the SP-5's greater push. The SP-5 emphasizes vocal grain, but the DT700 does not. Mid-centric clarity is more obvious on the SP-5. The treble is different. The DT700 appears to have close to neutral rendition. The SP-5 has a treble emphasis starting in the mid-treble. Clarity is more obvious on the SP-5. The SP-5 has greater detail retrieval, as the DT700 rendered 7 footsteps in my new light test. The SP-5 also has wider soundstage than the DT700. Hopefully, comparisons like these help you understand how products generally compare. There is no substitute to actually putting headphones on your head and listening, so if that's possible, that is what I recommend. What is obvious is that all 4 headphones in this comparison sound different and perform differently. You cannot mistake one for any other. Whether you will enjoy one, all, or none is up to you. I think Ultrasone makes interesting stuff. I'm not convinced that their S-Logic technology is truly game-changing, but it is something different in a world where it can be a bit difficult to make a choice among a deluge of options. When I look at the SP-5, I do not see an Adam Audio product. I see an Ultrasone headphone with Adam Audio's logo, and that's really what it is. Maybe there is some internal modifications to make the SP-5 sound closer to Adam Audio's house sound, but that's something I cannot confirm. Given its $500 price tag, Adam Audio needs to convince people that the SP-5 warrants such a large investment. And I am not convinced. First, while the build quality is agreeable, it is far, far too much plastic for the cost. Even the headband and yoke structure is plastic, and that's simply hard to accept for $500. Second, the accessories are basic. I have no real complaints about the cables or case, but the failure to include even a set of spare ear pads is a bit galling. Now, there's nothing special or proprietary about them, and they are essentially plastic with stiff foam, but for $500, Adam Audio should have made certain that we got at least an extra set. Third, the fit and comfort will be an issue for some. The tight clamp and pressure points will become uncomfortable. Long-term listening might not be enjoyable. Of course, if you do most of your work on speakers and need headphones for short sprints to check mixes, then the issue of comfort is, I think, mitigated. As for sound signature, well, it's a balanced tuning that leans towards analytical. If you prefer lots of bass, this will disappoint you. If you hate sibilance and treble, then this headphone will make you a very sad and angry person. But if you want clarity and placement, and you do not mind a sibilance emphasis, then the SP-5 might be your cup of tea. The concern I have is that for $500, the SP-5 is competing against some really good alternatives. For example, the Austrian audio gear is a bit cheaper, but provides more clarity, more detail, the same soundstage, far better build, and a night and day difference in comfort. And if you want a closer to neutral rendition, then the excellent Rode NTH100 or Bairdynamic DT700 are not only much cheaper, but also better built and more comfortable than the SP-5. It just seems to me that Adam Audio shot themselves in the foot with this price tag. It's just too much for what you actually get. Maybe if the build involved more metal, if the ear pads and headband were memory foam and we got more accessories, one might be able to somehow start an argument that this headphone is value at $500. But even then, you'd have to be a fan of Adam Audio or Ultrasone or want their sound signature to delve into this headphone for this price. Frankly, I think the SP-5 is overpriced. $400 is a more appropriate price tag, I think. That would put the SP-5 in the same price bracket as the Austrian audio stuff, yet still have some performance attributes that might lead people away from Austrian audio or some of the cheaper offerings from Rode or Beyerdynamic. If you find the SP-5 for around $400 or less, and you are looking for the sound signature it offers, then the SP-5 might be worth considering. But just as with the overpriced NDH-20, the SP-5 is out of touch with reality at its current price tag.